Okay, looks like we're on.
Hello.
Hello. So, so this is for going to be used, this video will be used for educational purposes just in my classroom. And that's okay with you, right? You
Yes.
would prefer that I don't make it into like a publicly available podcast or something like that? Is
Actually, I'm okay with that.
you okay with that too?
Oh,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, so I'm Samantha Black. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Saskatchewan in psychology, and I'm teaching human sexuality. And so I'm here talking with Keisha, who is a. Why don't you introduce yourself and say who you are and what your relationship is to the world of sex and sexuality?
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Keisha, and I currently work as a sacred sensual healer. And I have a long career in the adult entertainment business and sexual field. And I started out at 18 as a phone sex operator. And then when I was 19, I got into the X-rated business. I started doing X-rated movies and magazines. And after a year of doing that, I focused my attention on what was called feature dancing. So I made a name in the industry, and then I used to travel all over the United States and Canada, and I would dance on stage, and then afterwards the guys would like take pictures with me and I'd sign autographs. And so I did the feature dancing circuit for 9 years. Then I went back to college for a few years, and then I got back into the industry and did another lots of rounds of movies, new movies. And so I did my first movie in 1986, and I did my very last movie in 2007. So I had a very long career in front of the camera. And then I got into what was called the porn star escorting. And so that was from like 99, 2000 to 2007. And then I took some time off, and in 2009 and 2010, I took a couple of courses in sexological body work, which is erotic trance massage. And that changed my whole life and my whole relationship to sexuality, because having grown up in the adult entertainment business, it was all about porn style sex. And that's kind of what I knew. And then I learned this whole concept of relaxing into arousal. And that just like, wow, I felt things that I had never felt before. And that was amazing. And so then as I started working with my clients, I started introducing them to the concept of relaxing into arousal. And then in 2014 through 2019, I studied Westernized Tantra. And then I've also studied energy healing, body wisdom healing, Reiki energy healing. And now as a sacred sensual healer, I just combine all of these healing modalities into one. And I currently work as a sacred sensual healer. I've also gone back to college and I'm also studying positive psychology. So that's kind of like the course of my career since I was 18 years old, and I'm now 55.
How does positive psychology or psychology in general intersect with your work in sexuality?
So positive psychology is about going from like neutral to flourishing. And one of the ways that we can flourish as human beings is to explore our sexuality and embrace our sexuality and enjoy our sexuality. So part of flourishing is having, really getting in touch with your sexuality and enjoying it. And so that's where positive psychology and sexuality intersect for me. And, because so my passions are spirituality, sexuality, psychology, and personal growth. And those are the things that I have been passionate about ever since I can remember.
I see. You said that you had gotten into sex work around 18 and then you met your spiritual teacher at 20.
Yes.
So they've always kind of been developmentally side by side for you. Can you
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about like your spirit, and then you also mentioned that you in your spiritual community you don't really fit because you're a porn star, but then in the porn community you don't really fit because you're spiritual.
Yeah.
Can
Yeah,
you?
I've always felt like a little bit like an oddball in whatever community I've been in, because it's like I go on the set and I'm making porno movies, but I pray every day and I ask my higher self to join me when I make a movie, and and I see spirituality or sexuality as a spiritual expression, and I connect my spirituality with my sexuality even when I'm making a movie. And not everybody has a consciousness of that.
Mhm.
um, and in my spiritual group, there's not a lot of people. In fact, I was the only one in my spiritual group who was also a porn star. So yeah, it's I'm always dancing in different worlds and being my unique self. And I'm trying to be my authentic self in the porn, but I wasn't going to go and share about my spirituality on a porn set. And when I'm in my spiritual group, um just the fact that I was a porn star, I didn't always talk about it, only with the people who are close to me. um but yeah, it was different than most other people's profession who were in that group.
I don't want to assume that everyone has like a stigma against sexuality, but I know that there are um, stigmas against sexuality societally, especially for people with like, puritanical roots or like religious, constrictions towards their concept that, we shouldn't express ourselves sexually unless it's, in marriage. Um, there's a lot of these societal norms that are
Yeah.
applied to sexual expression. And I'm wondering how you bypassed all that.
Well, I understand that going way back, um, it was the religions who controlled the laws and the rules of the land. And, you know, one of the motivations of the people who make the laws is, how do we make a functioning society? And it's like, well, you got to control people's base urges. And, you don't want them, to get out of control. We don't want, you know, fatherless children having to run around, and we don't want all this chaos. So the best way for society to thrive, if this man marries a woman and they have children and nobody cheats on anybody, and you know you don't want to enjoy sex because like pleasure is can be dangerous. And so they put all these rules and labels on it. And also, and this is not done consciously, but if you take a look at the chakra system, and the sensual sexual chakra fuels all the rest of the chakras above it. And when you can fuel your sensual sexual chakra, it also produces a lot of creativity and self-connection. But if you can cut that off, if you can, control a person's sexuality, it it takes away their self fuel and it creates a dependency. So, those who want to control society want to create an authority dependency rather than having people get in touch with themselves and being their individual unique selves. Because when people are their individual and unique selves, they're less controllable. And well, that's not acceptable to people who want to have power over other people. So controlling sexuality has been very important, from the early ages, to keep people in line. And so this is how
Yeah.
they want to, make society be successful.
So you were just kind of aware of this as a teenager?
Oh, not at all.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm just curious. Like, how did you get into sex work? And then I want to loop back to that word you used, chakra, but I want to ask how you got into sex work and kind of internally avoided taking on the stigma of doing sex work.
Yeah, so basically, I have always followed my gut feeling. I was born into this life with an innate sense of that it's important for me to follow my gut feeling. It's how I've navigated my life without even knowing that that's what you're supposed to do, knowing that that's a form of self-trust. Before I ever found out about it consciously, I just automatically would follow my gut feeling and follow my hunches, and I would find an interest in something. So when I was in high school, I found a tiny little, actually, I wasn't in high school. I was after high school because I was already 18 and I graduated at 17 in 1984. And I saw this, I was looking for in the want ads. Like for some reason, I had obsession with want ads. And it's back when we had like papers and they had like little tiny ads in the papers. And so I was just,
1985.
what's that?
1985.
Yep, 1985.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was like the LA Weekly or something. And I'm looking in, and I was looking for something and I didn't know what, but I was obsessed with want ads. And one day I found this ad that said, "Fantasy phone call girls wanted, must be attractive." And I thought that was the weirdest thing. Like, why do you have to be attractive to be a fantasy phone call girl? Like, you're just talking on the phone. What does it matter what you look like? And so I was curious. So I called them up and they said, okay, well, I know there's a lot of fantasy phone call companies that are, starting up, but we're different because we prove to the guys that they're talking to an attractive girl by taking a custom posed Polaroid picture of the girl that they talk to. And I was like, interesting. And I was very curious. So I went down for an interview, and part of the interview was taking a few nude Polaroids. And I'd never done any nude modeling before, but I was adventurous and curious. So I'm like, okay, I'll give it a try. And so they took some nude pictures, and really, like, one of the reasons why I wanted to go down there is I wanted to see if I was considered attractive, because all my life I've had body dysmorphia and like have never seen myself as attractive. And so a little, I did the interview and they explained how their company works, and and then a few days later they gave me a call back and said, "We'd love to hire you." And so I was like, oh, cool. So that was my first entry into the adult entertainment world. And it was a very gentle entry. The owner of the fantasy phone call company, oh, he was such a nice person. Like, he literally reminded me a little bit of Mr. Rogers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Like, he was like so kind and so he was just so lovely. And he's like, "I will never pick up on you, but if you want to seduce me, I won't say no." So he was like, he wasn't a creep in that way. Like, he never ever made advances on the girls. And it made it very safe. It made it a very safe work environment. And it was really fun because we would have like pizza parties. We'd have pajama pizza parties where all the girls would come over and we'd all be in like these sexy pajamas. And then we'd order pizza, and then we'd like kind of like punk on the delivery guy and go, "Oh, can you bring the pizza in and set it down on the table?" And then we'd like stand up and bend over and go, "Oh, I wonder if this is the kind of pizza that I ordered." and then we'd go, "Oh, hang on a step, so we have to go upstairs and get the money." And the poor guy would be just blushing, and somebody would go upstairs and get the money and he'd just be like really embarrassed.
So you've just treated it as something that you enjoyed and that you had fun with.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Did you ever have like a sense of, how a lot of people are shamed, and especially women, shamed for expressing sexuality? Like,
Oh,
I'm just like wondering
absolutely.
how you avoided that.
No, I was shamed. I was called a slut before I lost my virginity because I had an innate sexual energy from a very young age. So in seventh grade, when I still had not had sex yet, I remember people writing on the wall saying, "Hey, she's a slut," you know, and I was like, "How can I be a slut? I haven't even lost my virginity yet. Like, how is that even possible?" Yeah, I was slut shamed. And so when I got into the industry, I felt like I could just be myself. Like, it's like,
So
first,
it sounds like you feel like sexuality is your calling in life. Like
yeah,
your gift to share, just like someone else might be really attracted to food and preparing food, and their gift is like being a chef. Or
yeah,
someone else is really attracted to fashion and they like to design garments, or someone else really has a flair for doing people's hair. You
yeah.
know, that your flair and your gift is for expressing sexuality and for making others comfortable with their sexuality. Would you say that's
One of my callings, definitely. And it's been a
okay?
big, well, it's sexuality and spirituality and psychology and
Yes,
personal growth. But yeah,
yes.
definitely it starts with the sexuality because that's where I first landed, as a career. And yeah, it was when I got into the industry, I just felt like, oh, I can be myself. I can be this sexy, flirty, run around naked and and nobody shames me for it and they pay me for it. Like, oh my God, this is so great. I'm having so much fun.
So we touched on for a minute that there is this kind of dark underside to the sex industry, such as trafficking, mental breakdowns due to pressure and drug use. And how did you bypass kind of the underbelly of the sex industry? And did you see it?
I was very distant from it. As in my spiritual group, I am also a medium. And I did a lot of work with spirits. Like one of the things that I did as a medium was I would help spirits who got stuck, people who died and they got stuck, and I would help them cross over. So, so by the time I was 23, my mediumship was developing. One time, I started seeing spirits because I had partied, and I called up my spiritual teacher. I'm like, I'm seeing spirits. And so he sent a medium over to clear the spirits out. And then he said, look, you cannot lose control of your body. Otherwise, you're going to deal with spirits that you're not meant to deal with. And so, at 23, I stopped doing all drugs and alcohol, and I never did them on a regular basis. Like I was always like trying to be healthy. So I was kind of a little bit of a weekend partier. Um, and so I think, a lot, I didn't get invited to like the porno parties that people went to. The people who did drink and do drugs, they didn't do them on set. They would do the movies, get paid, and then go party. And I wasn't invited to those parties because I didn't party. And so there's a lot that went on within the industry and the people in the industry that I never saw. In fact, I had sent you the Realtor Report interview that I did that you didn't see.
Mhm.
And by listening to that podcast, the Realtor Report, I found out so much about my coworkers that I never knew. I realized like I never really knew my coworkers. We would just show up on set and I'm like, "Hi, how are you doing? I'm having sex with you today." "Oh, very good. Okay. What do you like? What do you like? What do you not like? And how do you want to roll this scene?" And then that would be it. And then I'd go on my merry way, they'd go on their merry way. And there was a lot of people that I never really knew in depth. And so by listening to a lot of those interviews, I actually got to know people's lives and what they went through. And it was just stuff that I didn't see when I was in the industry.
Because you were focused on your own spiritual practice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, how did you avoid getting a STD?
Um, well, back in the day, they had, before they started testing, because it was in the mid 80s or the early or late 80s that they started testing for HIV. And um, and when they did movies, they always did an external cum shot. So that made it like less likely, if somebody did have something, it made it less likely to be exposed. And then this is before the whole Today sponge got taken off the market. We used to always use the Today sponge, and it has nonoxynol 9 in it, and that would
Okay, so
kill.
that's an internal contraceptive sponge.
Yeah.
They don't make anymore?
Oh, actually, it went off the market for a while, and then it came back. I don't know if you're familiar with Seinfeld, but they had a whole
Yes,
they
I
had a
saw
whole
that
thing on being
episode.
sponge. It was somebody was sponge worthy because it got taken off the market. And so then there was only like a limited amount of sponges available. So there was this
Yeah.
whole thing about being sponge worthy, but they have come back on the market.
Okay, so you would use those as uh to prevent pregnancy.
I was on the pill. It was just something we did. It was just part of our hygiene that we used the Today sponge. It had nonoxynol 9 in it. It was just an extra protection, in addition to being on the pill. And we heard that that the nonoxynol 9 kills the HIV virus, which I'm not really sure if that's true, but the guys didn't even come inside of us anyway.
Mhm.
And so I just, and then once they started testing, it used to be that they would test us every month for HIV and a slew of other diseases or infections. And now the industry tests every 2 weeks,
Mhm.
and for a whole battery of stuff. So I actually felt safer within the industry because we were like, this is our livelihood. We have to stay clean. We have to stay careful. And so I felt a lot more safe with people within the industry than I did with just like meeting some random guy at a party and being with him, because I don't know where he's been. But
Right,
people in the
right.
industry were a lot more aware of how to take care of themselves, because if somebody gets something, you don't work.
I see. Yeah. Yeah, I want to loop back to the word chakra that you used, and you were saying how the root chakra is the sexual chakra, and so for
No, the root chakra is different than the base chakra. So the root chakra is like where your tailbone and anus is, and that goes downward to the earth. And then there's the sensual sexual chakra, which is also called the base chakra or the creative chakra or the sacral chakra, and that's the one that fuels the rest above.
I just wanted to introduce the term though to people
Mhm.
who don't know what it is. And to acknowledge that it's a Hindu term, and it's a Sanskrit word that means a wheel or a place.
Mhm.
And this might be a good time to talk about all the influences that go into your work as a sacred sensual healer, and how the westernized concept of Tantra fits into that. Um,
Yeah. Well, I first learned about chakras from my spiritual teacher. And this was long before I ever got involved in Tantra. And so like the way he taught chakras was, there's the root chakra that grounds you to the earth. And then there's the sacral chakra, which is fueled by sexuality, and it also fuels creativity, and it fuels all the rest of the chakras above. And then there's the solar plexus, which is your gut feeling, and this is where you go to find out, does this something feel right to me, and your gut will give you one of three answers: yes, no, or I don't have enough information. And my teacher was all about teaching self-trust. My spiritual teacher was like, hey, don't follow me. Let me teach you how to follow you. You learn how to follow you by experimenting and then checking with your gut feeling and say, hey, does this feel right for me? If it does, move toward it. If it doesn't, move in another direction.
mhm.
And then The heart chakra, of course, is where all the foundation of love and strength and self-love, self-trust, self-acceptance, self-commitment, self-appreciation, and all of these things are in the heart chakra. And then there's the communication chakra. And this chakra deals with not only verbal communication, but nonverbal communication. Your communication chakra is what sends the energy of who you are out into the world so that it can attract what fits. So, part of like how I get work is, my throat chakra energy goes out into the world and finds people who fit what I do and draws them back into my life, and somehow they make their way to my website, and that's how they find me. And then there's the third eye, and that's your psychic intuition. And then there's the crown chakra, which is your consciousness. So that's how I learned it.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that this comes from the Hindu religious system, and that a traditional Hindu teacher might conceive of and teach these concepts in a different way.
Yes, absolutely.
And that the way that we have come to understand these concepts in the West is quite different in many cases than how it is presented and taught in its original culture, which is Nepalese, Tibetan, and Indian.
Exactly.
And in particular, those cultures, in regards to Tantra, it's a formalized spiritual tradition that is not sexual in nature. Like the fundament is spiritual growth and personal growth. And somehow, as those concepts migrated to the West, Tantra has become Westernized. And can you talk about like what this Westernized version of Tantra is, and what you know about the original culture as opposed to what you know about how it's presented in the West? And
I don't know a lot about the original teachings of Tantra because I've never studied them. I've only studied Tantra with Westernized teachers, and so my teacher, Charles Muir, he studied with Montauk Chia. And so, as everything evolves, and
Montauk Chia is Thai, right? I think he's Thai. Yeah, he's a Thai. Was he a monk, or is he a monk?
I don't know his full story.
I know he's I don't know his story either, but I know he's a very well-known teacher of Thai and Chinese energy cultivation practices, and he's written a few books.
So my Tantra teacher studied with him, and I'm sure he's had other teachers, and so he developed his own school of Tantra. And
Charles Muir did. And Montauk Chia also has a school. I don't know if it's called, I don't know if he uses the word Tantra. I think he uses the word energy healing or energy cultivation. And I know he's got students from all over the world, so I don't know what culture he situates himself in. Although he's Thai, I know he does a lot of Chinese practices, but I don't know much about him. And I'm saying this because people watching this video might want to read Montauk Chia's work. They might want to think about how the concept of Tantra has traveled around the world and become different from its original cultural, origin. What is that? What does it become? How has it changed? Is it a good thing it's changed? Is it a bad thing that it's been, like, is it appropriation, or is it just global migration of this idea through colonization, acculturation, global migration? These are just ideas that someone might find interesting to either write a paper about or to talk about further. But that's why I want to acknowledge that these are big topics that we're touching on. And it expresses itself through your work as Westernized Tantra. And can you talk about, you were saying earlier why you use that term? basically for marketing purposes. And
Yeah. So, I've struggled with like, what do I call my business? And, so I've studied Tantra, but my work isn't just like the Tantra that I learned from Charles Muir. I combine a bunch of different things. I combine sexological body work and the practices I learned there. I combine the things that I learned from Tantra, but not everything from there. I combine, I studied with, Teresa Jane, I studied body wisdom healing, which is sourcing the earth energy as the energy of healing. I've studied Reiki, was about using the universal light energy, and Tantra is about sharing the heart energy and the energy of love as an energetic healing form of modality. And so I've combined all these things together. So I call myself a sacred sensual healer because that's more accurate, but nobody's going to Google sacred sensual healer because it's not like a commonly known term. If somebody is interested in something similar to what I do, they're going to Google the word Tantra. And that is just become a more well-known term for something similar to what I do.
Yeah. And so what is a sacred, like, what is sexual healing to you? And why is it important?
So I help people to get in touch with themselves and their body and connect with their body and to use the energy of sexuality for healing. And so when somebody comes to me, I always have them state their healing intention. And so what I mean by that is like, what would you like to bring into your life that would improve the quality of your life? And what would you like to let go of that would improve the quality of your life? So we start the session because energy works on intention. And so we start the session with a healing intention. And so we focus on that. And I draw a lot of clients to me. Like my favorite clients to work with are people who have insecurity around their sexuality. They have insecurity around their body. I struggled with body dysmorphia my entire life. Well, at least since I was 12. And so I have a lot of compassion for people who struggle with body image issues and people who think, oh, I can't enjoy my sexuality because I don't have a perfect body. And it's like, no, everybody is entitled to enjoy their sexuality, not just, the people who have these quote unquote perfect bodies. Sexuality is not just for them. Sexuality is for everyone. And so I love, like, one of the things I focus on in my healing sessions is compassion and teaching them self-compassion and bringing that energy of self-compassion into that so they have more capacity to enjoy their sexuality and to embrace their bodily imperfections and to know that they can still enjoy sexual pleasure despite what they think their body looks like.
So it sounds like to you sexual healing is about fostering self-acceptance,
self-love, self-trust, self-acceptance, self-commitment, and just self-nurturing. Sexuality is very nurturing. It really moves our energy and it makes us feel alive and it refreshes our energy. And it's so much better to be walking around in the world when you have like this life force energy flowing through you than when you're cut off from your sexuality. It just feels a little flat.
Yeah. How do you think that this might relate to people who are asexual, who don't have a lot of sexual motivation?
Oh, asexuality. The way I relate to asexuality is that it's a spiritual learning lesson. I believe before you're born, you choose what is it that you want to come here to learn. And so you know, I believe that you choose your parents, and that, you know, when you're coming into the body, your spiritual intention for your spiritual learning lesson on this planet goes into that body and flips all the little switches on the RNA and DNA in that body, so that when that body comes out into the world, it's a physical representation of your spiritual learning lesson. So people who are asexual are just like, hey, that's not something I want to deal with in this life, but I can focus on my creativity. So a person who's asexual, they can access their base chakra energy through focusing on creativity, because sexuality is about creation. Like, people get together and they have sex and they can create a whole new life. And 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 so instead of having sex or enjoying sexuality, an asexual person can focus on their creativity and creative endeavors, and that will fuel their base chakra
Yeah, I see. Right.
and make them feel more alive.
Yeah, right, right. That's interesting. Yeah. Do you identify as, I'm just curious, like we're talking about some labels.
Mhm.
Do you identify as pansexual or bisexual or straight or a woman? Like, can you tell us, like, how you identify, and then maybe something about your cultural background, and if that informs part of what you do? And then actually, I'd like to follow that up. If I'll remind you of this, if this is kind of becoming a large question, but
Okay.
if we can talk a little bit about how sex work has informed your personal relationships.
Yeah, I identify as bisexual, and you know, I think, you know, being able to be in the adult industry was really great for me, because I got to explore all that. It was so cool to be able to, you know, I think today's younger culture, I think they're a lot more readily willing to experiment with those kinds of things and to see where they are on the spectrum. And, you know, on the Kinsey scale, there's like the 0 to 6, and it can be flexible. There's times when I've been, you know, more bisexual, and sometimes I'm less bisexual. Um, and so that can move. And I think sexuality can be fluid, or it can be fixed. There are people who are absolutely a 0 on the heterosexual scale, and there's people who are absolutely a 0 on the homosexual scale. And then there's people in between who are like, yes, I'm definitely 50-50. And then there's some who kind of float back and forth in the middle.
And this is
And
Kinsey's model,
yeah,
right?
Kinsey's
Yeah,
model.
that's the
Yeah.
Kinsey scale.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And so I'm really glad that I got a chance to explore all of that, because you know, it's been really fun, because I don't know if I would have been able to explore as many women as I would have had I not been in the industry.
mhm.
And, you know, I'm kind of grateful that, you know, part of the norm for making movie scenes, you did boy, girl, 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 threesome, you know, and it's like, I got to play with a lot of women, and that's not something that I grew up with as a cultural norm. Although I did have my grandmother's sister was a lesbian, and nobody ever talked about it. She just had a roommate. Nikki was her roommate, and Nikki always came to the family meals, and it was just, you know, normal, but they never expressed any affection or sexuality in front of anybody. So, you know, I kind of came to just kind of accept, like, oh, that's normal. And I have a cousin who's gay. And so I grew up with, like, you know, LGBTQ influences, but it just wasn't talked about the way that it's talked about today.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, one time I was on a talk show. I was 20 years old, and I went on a talk show, and I was really surprised, because they stacked the audience with like a really conservative religious crowd, and they totally bamboozled me, like, oh, you're just going to come on and talk about people who make women money with their body. And so I get on there and I'm talking about porn, and there's this whole crowd is shaming me. And then somebody asked, they said, so do you have sex with women in these movies? And I'm like, yeah, it's really fun. And literally there was this cop sitting next to me. I don't remember why he was on the panel, but he literally picked up his chair and moved it away from me. And I'm like, really? Out of all the things I've done in movies, having sex with women you think is appalling? Like, I don't understand.
Mhm, mhm.
Um,
So it sounds like you just kind of, um, you know who I heard say this was Annie Sprinkle, who's
mhm.
now that she's a well-known sexologist and
Yeah, I
former
know
sex
Annie.
worker who is now a performance artist and sexual healer.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes, in
she,
fact, I got to see her live on stage in New York when I was like 20 years old.
yeah, nice. And she's also, like you, had a very long career as a self-directed woman in the porn and sex industry, which is unusual.
Yeah.
And I did want to touch on like how it is that you feel you have been able to be self-directed when there are so many people who are taken advantage of in this industry.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it has a lot to do with the influence of my spiritual teacher, because all of his teachings were about, getting in touch with yourself, building self-trust, letting go of authority dependency, embracing individual responsibility, and, setting boundaries. I never did things in the industry that didn't feel right to me.
mhm.
Um, and it's like, if I didn't do it in my home life, I wasn't going to do it on film.
You
And
said something about Carolyn Meiss's introduction of prostitution as an archetype, which of
oh
course it's
yeah.
a well-known archetype. The prostitute, the sacred whore, the virgin whore dilemma, or personality development crisis, however it is that you view it. But this is another link to psychology that I'd like to make with
Oh
prostitution.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love Carolyn Mace, and I love how she talks about the archetypes, and especially the archetype of the prostitute, because prostitution and how she talks about it, it's not the fact of having sex for money. It's a prostitute is, how much are you willing to sell your soul for security? And I've never felt like a prostitute, even though a lot of people would call me a prostitute because I've had sex for money in movies and in behind closed doors. But I never felt like I was selling my soul for security. Being in this business was in line with who I am. It was part of my authentic self, and it was part of my spiritual development. In fact, in my very first reading with my spiritual teacher when I was 20, he said to me, he says, your learning lesson in this life is to be a teacher and a healer. And, he says, yeah, you're teaching now when you're acting. He says, people who watch you on camera, they get he says, you make sexual openness and responsiveness seem reasonable and attainable when they might otherwise think it's horrible. He says, but you just are showing up on camera and having a good time and basically sending this message out to the audience like, hey, everybody, look here. This is a really enjoyable way to being a human being. Try it out. It's really fun.
Mhm.
And, and that was just, the message my soul was portraying to people. And he says, whether they realized it consciously or not, they were getting a healthy change in their thinking towards sexuality. And he explained to me that no matter what I did in my life or what form that it took, that fundamentally I'm a teacher and a healer, and that's who I am. And no matter what I do for work, that's it, that will be expressed in whatever form it takes. And
Mhm.
so it's taken the form of phone sex, it's taken the form of doing movies, it's taken the form of dancing, it's taken the form of sacred sensual healing.
Mhm.
And it's just like the core of who I am is a teacher and a healer.
Right. And so with that, and I just want to point out too, that those are also archetypes. Teaching and teacher is an
Yes,
archetype, healer is an
yes,
archetype,
yes,
prostitute is an archetype. And according to this definition, a prostitute is a person who is selling their soul in a way that's not aligned with their life purpose. And
exactly,
that could be someone who's
exactly.
doing sex work, but actually they're supposed to be a pilot.
Yeah, exactly. And there could be a pilot who should be an actor, or
Right.
there's it's like there's prostitutes in every profession. There's people who sell their soul for security in every profession.
Mhm.
And it's like I'm actually in the sex profession and I'm the one person who hasn't sold my soul for security.
Right. That's an
Now,
interesting way to look at it. Yeah. Right. And I can see how that would allow you to remain empowered doing what you do.
yeah.
Yeah. You had said when we were talking via email, you said you feel like, I'm just going to read what you said. You
Hmm.
said, I feel like the scholarly field of human sexuality has come such a long way since I was young. It's a lot more inclusive and less judgmental.
Yeah. So when so I'm back in college now, and this year I've taken a lifespan development course and a human sexuality course. And I love that they're teaching about gender identity and like having open-mindedness and compassion for trans people. And I'm like, oh my God, they're teaching this in college. This is so exciting. Oh my God. See, I learned it I was a part of a group called Sex Positive Los Angeles. And so the whole foundation of Sex Positive Los Angeles group was like, hey, sex positive means that whatever a person is, if it's right for them, it's acceptable. If you're heterosexual, if you're homosexual, if you're bisexual, if you're pansexual, great, you're accepted.
Mm.
If, whatever your orientation, if you're trans, it's all accepted. And I love that. I love the inclusivity. And so I experienced that in my social group. But when I came to college and found out they're teaching this in college, oh my God, I was so excited. And, I wrote some papers on it, and it was
Yeah.
really fun to be doing the scholarly research on it. I'm like, oh my God, they're doing scholarly research on it.
So
This is
you're
so
studying
exciting.
human sexuality now as it relates to positive psychology, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and what is something that you might share with students who are uh in this course that will probably be their first introduction to human sexuality as an academic topic?
Mhm.
What's something that you might share with them as just something that you've learned that might apply to people who are just beginning to look at human sexuality as an academic topic?
You know, in my last human sexuality course, the one thing that I came across that I was so enamored with is the sexual scripts theory. This is so amazing. Like there was this one scholarly journal article, and this teacher talked about sexual scripts theory by having their class write what's the sexual script of Netflix and chill. And so everybody got into groups and they collaborated in their groups, and they basically came down like with a very similar, every group came up with a similar script. So you decide to get together and watch a movie, then you're playing the movie and you start making out, and then you take off your clothes, and then you have sexual activity, and then you finish, then you clean up, and then you have some, you get dressed, have some snacks, and finish watching the movie. And that's kind of like a sexual script.
Mhm.
And one of the things is that when people watch pornography, they're learning sexual scripts from what we do on camera. And people need to be educated that no, you're not supposed to follow these sexual scripts. This is not reality. Like, if I had everything my way and I could just wave a magic wand and create an entire new industry and wave a magic wand and change everybody's attitude towards sexuality, I think there should be an industry where they realistically uh, show young people how sex is actually supposed to be in a relationship, because people have access to porn on their smartphones. An 8-year-old can watch porn on their smartphone, and they start thinking that's what sex is supposed to be. And us who are in pornography, we're making it for their visual pleasure and what looks exciting, but it may not actually feel the best when you're at home with a partner. And so people are copying porno and integrating them into their sexual scripts and finding out it's not all that satisfying.
I see. So,
Yeah.
so the fascination with sexual scripts on your part is that people can learn to create our own sexual script based on what feels best for us and feels healthy for us rather than on what we're presented externally. Am I
Yeah.
hearing that right?
Yeah. I mean, in the 1920s, when they started making movie pictures, a lot of people got their sexual scripts from what they saw in regular, movies. And now people are picking up their sexual scripts from porno movies, which is a really bad idea. It's like, when you watch a movie and you see a car chase, like, oh, it's really exciting to watch, but you're not supposed to go home and drive that way.
Right.
It's like our making a movie is our equivalent to a car chase. It's like, yes, it's really exciting to watch, but that's not necessarily what's going to feel good at home. There's the cuddling and the caring, and there's, asking your partner what feels good to you. And really, like, I love, are you familiar with Betty Martin?
No.
Oh my God, I have to send you. So
Yeah.
look on YouTube, Betty Martin, Wheel of Consent.
Okay.
And she just came out with a new book. It is called, I have it on my shelf here, The Art of Receiving and Giving.
Okay.
And it's so beautiful. And there just needs to be way more communication when it comes to sexuality than there is. If we shot what looked good, or I mean what felt good, it would be really boring to watch. And that's why they don't do it. And pornography was not meant to be educational. But because there's not comprehensive sexual education, and because they don't want anybody under 18 watching nude people have fun together, this just industry would never happen, where they make realistic movies about how to be a loving, connected, gentle partner, with the sexual partner. um so just like,
Mhm.
people picked up stuff in the movies in the 1920s, they're picking up stuff from the porno movies, and people need
Yeah.
to be educated. Like, I think there should be a warning on porno movies, like, this is not a documentary, this is not the way you're supposed to do at home.
Yeah.
Please communicate with your partner. Even like there's a lot of extreme pornography where they have violence and stuff. Like, everybody has the right to experience or to express sexuality the way that feels good for them, and it's just good to be educated. Like, women do not want things that are not consensual. Women don't want to be raped. Rape is a crime. Don't do it. Even if it's portrayed in the movie as a fantasy, like, this is not what you're supposed to copy. And they've even done um scholarly research and articles where they've taken college students, then they've sat them down ahead of time, and they said, okay, um, this is just for entertainment purposes. never have sex unless you get consent, and rape is a crime and don't do it. And they educate people before they watch the movies, and they show them the porno movies, and they're just less likely to take those on as sexual scripts. So there just needs to be more education that pornography is not necessarily and most likely not a good sexual script to follow.
I see. Right.
But have fun watching it. It's just
Yeah.
not what you should do at home.
Yeah. What do you do in your sensual healing sessions? Like, what is that? You explained kind of how you came to that, how you came through different forms of sex work and are now doing like sensual healing.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you do in a session?
So the first half hour is just talking, connecting with the person, getting a little sense of their background and what issues they're having around their sexuality, or a lot of it is about self-confidence. Most people that come to me are wanting to get in touch with their sexuality, but also a lot of people just have a lot of self-confidence issues around their sexuality. And so a lot of it is just giving them permission to be human and imperfect. And so, we go over like the elements of breathing and sounding. So when you breathe, it's going to help you feel more pleasure in your body. So, and you're breathing and you're oxygenating your brain. So, our brain has sensing centers for each part of our body. So when I'm touching somebody, the only reason why they can feel it is because there's a sensing center in their brain for their arm or whatever part of their body that I'm touching. So they want to oxygenate the brain so that they're going to actually feel more pleasure when I'm touching them. And also sounding is really important. That's also a really important element for pleasure. So some people are really shy. So I'm like, okay, even if you can make a little sound like, oh, even if it's just a little bit of sound, but then you can use bigger sounds like any of the vowel sounds like ah or oh, ooh. Even voo is a really good one. I've learned this from my energy teacher. When you use voo, it's like really connects the vagus nerve, and it stimulates the vagus nerve, and it helps move stuck emotions out of your body. So it's like so that helps move energy and stuck energy out of your body. And so I teach them all about like the chakras, and so I go over all of that. And then I start, they take a shower, and then I start them laying face down. And so Tantra Sacred Sensual Healing is about connecting the heart chakra with the sensual chakra.
Westernized Tantra.
Yes.
I just want to point out.
Absolutely westernized Tantra.
Very different from the original Tantra.
Exactly. Yes. So
which is not focused on sexuality.
Exactly.
It's focused on
spirituality,
devotion to the divine.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So connecting the heart chakra with the sensual sexual chakra. And because it just, when you connect the heart chakra with the sensual sexual chakra, there's just a richer experience. And so when I was making movies, it was all focused on the sensual sexual chakra. And that was really fun and enjoyable. But as I've matured, I've wanted more. Like just focusing on the sensual sexual chakra wasn't enough for me anymore. So
and when you say chakra, what that really means is an energy center in the body.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's again a Hindu term.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I didn't learn it from a Hindu person. I learned it from my spiritual teacher who was born in Boston, and that's just the term I learned from him.
And it's another example of what sometimes is cultural appropriation, and sometimes it's just a migration of ideas.
Yeah,
and I think the intention behind how it's expressed might be relevant too.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and it's
Anyway, again, it's an interesting topic, you know, how these ideas have migrated globally and become, you know, appropriated or else
they've
used in a different way in the
yeah,
West.
they've shifted. I mean, even the English language, you know, 1,000 years ago, the English language doesn't sound anything then like it does now. It's morphed over time. So somebody who learned something about sexuality in you know, the Hindu and the Tantra there somehow brought, I don't know where it originally came from. I don't know
And
where
that's a very
Westernized.
interesting question. I don't know either. And that
Yeah,
actually would be a really interesting project to see how it
yeah,
migrated from its original concept and what it's
yeah, because
become and why.
even it's
Yeah.
even the same thing has happened with yoga. You know, it's
Mhm.
the westernized version of yoga. It's completely different than the Indian original idea of yoga, because in
Yeah.
India it's more about like, you know, we're all one, and you know, it's about, you know,
Well, it's a
connecting.
spiritual practice.
Yeah, and it's
It's a very
connecting with,
sophisticated spiritual practice.
yeah, and it's
And
about connecting
yeah,
with the oneness, whereas westernized yoga is a lot about getting in shape, you know,
yeah,
and it's like
right.
more focused on the physical
Yeah,
body than it is the spiritual origins of
yeah.
connecting with the divine.
To the point that some people say we shouldn't actually use the word yoga to describe it because it is so vastly different from the original intended yoga. And the same could be said for Tantra.
Yeah,
But I just want to point this out for people who are watching because this is a really interesting topic.
yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah.
so in your sensual healing session, you use the person takes a shower, then they lay down face
Mhm.
down on your massage table, I guess, and
On the
then
bed, on a
you
bed.
okay, then you proceed to kind of with touch open the energy centers of the body so that they can feel more of their energy flowing through their body, and you
Yeah, well, I start on the sacral chakra and the heart chakra and connect those two energies together. And then I use a ton of organic coconut oil, and I like cover their entire body. And then I keep having them connect. I have them breathe and sound, and I have them connect with their healing intention. So while I'm touching them, they're connecting with their healing intention while they're moving energy,
Mhm.
and just, you know, I'm channeling the heart chakra energy, the energy of love, and the universal light energy and the earth energy, and just sharing all of that with their body. And yeah, it's a really amazing experience. And people will, after, you know, the whole session is over, they're like, wow, you know, just like
Yeah.
they definitely feel energetically changed, because a lot
Mhm.
of people who have shame around their sexuality or shame around their body, their energy gets stuck. And so, you know, through the process of the sacred sensual healing session, they're moving energy, and their energy starts getting unstuck, and they feel very different at the end of the session than they do at the beginning of the
Yeah.
session.
So it's essentially erotic or sensual massage, but paired with a healing intention rather
Yes.
than purely, um, you know,
Yeah, it's not focused solely on the central sexual chakra. It
right.
combines the, you know, the sacral and the heart chakra, um, and the healing intention.
Mhm.
And
And I can see how this idea of like including the whole person, you know, and all of the energies inside the person, and including the mental energy of intention and the emotional energy um of desire,
mhm,
and whatever emotions come up as your feelings, you allow your feelings to flow through your being instead of suppressing them or shaming them. I can see how
yeah,
this is linked to positive psychology and to sex therapy, although you say that you don't use the word therapist in your practice because you need a license to do that.
exactly.
Yeah, and so are you working towards licensure, or are you happy with presenting your work as just sacred? Do you call it sacred sensual healing?
Yeah, sacred
Oh,
sensual
yeah,
healing.
is that the way that you're happy presenting it, or do you feel that you need licensure of some sort?
You know, I honestly don't know at this point. I follow my gut feeling. I don't always know what's on the road ahead. I just got a gut feeling in December to go back to college in January.
Yeah,
I didn't know, you
yeah.
know, in November of last year that I was going to go back to college in January. Like I'm always following my gut feeling, and the road ahead of me gets revealed like a little bit at a time. So I do know that I'm loving school and that I'm doing really good at it and I'm learning a lot and I'm having a good time. And then I also started my positive psychology course. It's called it's a certification for applied positive psychology, and it's a 9-month course that I've been in. And next month will start our last month. And so once I get my certification in applied positive psychology, I'm going to be taking the coaching course in applied
Mhm,
positive psychology. So
mhm,
I'm not sure how my career will evolve from there. I just know that it will,
mhm.
and that you
Yeah.
know, that I will be integrating everything I learn into everything I do.
Is
Um,
what you do legal
um,
according to the laws of California?
well, put it this way. Um, it's not, they do not enforce the laws against, um, it's not technically legal, you know, because but there's nobody looking for me. You know, it's like
Okay.
um it's it's tolerated, you know, it's like they go through different law enforcement will go through different phases on what they focus on based on, you know, what their voting constituency has, you know, wants them to pursue. So I know that in some places, I know that like in Arizona, there was a lot of bus for this one tantra community place, and they really came down really hard on them with the law. Um, I have never felt threatened. Like, you know, I've had police officers as clients, you know, and
Mhm,
they're not looking for me.
mhm.
um, and so technically it's not legal because it's sexuality for in exchange for money. Um, but they're, yeah, they don't enforce the law. Usually they're looking for sex traffickers. They're looking for, um, you know, when they do enforce like Vice, when they're in, you know, the people that Vice are looking for are people on the street, or if somebody complains, if there's a massage parlor and somebody complains about it, they go after that. Um, I think a lot of the attention of ICE is going into sex trafficking because that's become a problem that there's been a lot of awareness brought to. And so, you know, even in hotels, they have, they train the staff, like, here's what to look
Mhm,
for sex trafficking.
mhm.
And so that they have the signs, stewardesses are trained. Here's the signs to look for, you know, if you know you see a younger woman with an older man and she's not, you know, she doesn't look like his daughter and she's kind of, you know, looks like she's a little scared, that could be a red flag. You know, there was a stewardess that, you know, left a note in the bathroom like, do you need help? And the
Mhm.
girl wrote back yes. And so when they landed, they had police there, and, you know, and she was indeed being trafficked. So there's a lot more awareness going into the problem of sex trafficking. And so I think that's where they're putting their focus these days. Um,
Right.
the individual, um, the individual practitioners are not considered a public nuisance. Um,
Okay. Can
and
you explain for the people who are watching the differences between legalization of sex work and decriminalization of sex work, and whether you think this is a good idea or a bad idea?
so legalization, they're really really don't want to legalize, because then the government will be seen as endorsing these businesses. But decriminalization, they can say, well, we don't approve of it, but we're not going to arrest you for it.
I see. Yeah, okay, yeah. And so currently each state, each province, each country has vastly different regulations around both decriminalization and legalization of whatever type of sexual activity they're regulating. Is that?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think up in Vancouver, it was decriminalized.
Mhm.
And
It's decriminalized in many countries, and then it's highly criminal in other countries.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's see. I'm just gonna look at the questions we talked about and see if there's anything else that oh, you were gonna tell us about your I don't know if this has anything to do with your relationship to your work, but your cultural background um and how you see your, like, who you are and how does who you are and what your ancestral, like, knowledge base, does that inform your work at all, or does that kind of have nothing to do with it?
Well, just like how westernized tantra is an amalgamation of, somebody's learned something somewhere and brought it over here and called it tantra. I'm definitely a product of colonization. So on my father's side, I have two great grandfathers from Spain. Those were the colonizer, and one came to California and had an affair with a Chumash Indian woman, or Native American, I should actually say, and had my grandmother. And then the other Spanish great grandfather went to Mexico, and that had my great grandmother. And so I'm a mixture of, on my father's side, Chumash, Spanish, and Native American Chumash. And then on my mother's side, I'm Swedish and English. So yeah, I'm what I call an American mutt, just like, just like how knowledge gets dispersed around the world and transforms, it's like I'm a product of migration and colonization and
Social
yeah.
fusion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does any of those lineages kind of inform who you are, or is it just kind of like, I'm just curious.
I love learning about my Chumash roots, because I was born and raised here in Los Angeles. And, the Chumash, were pretty widespread in California
Oh, I
until the
see. Yeah.
Spanish came.
Yeah.
And they were pretty, almost wiped out to extinction. And the rest of them, they converted to Catholicism. And so it was really fascinating to find those roots. And I did know my great grandma. Her name was Reina, and I loved her dearly. And she was like the first loss that I experienced of a human being when I was 7 years old. And so I do feel a connection, because people like, oh, you were born and raised here, you're a native. And I'm like, yeah, I'm literally native. Like my great grandmother was Chumash. And so I like having just like a sense of history and being connected to my roots in that way. But also having the Mexican roots and the Spanish roots, and then the Swedish and English. I like knowing all of those pieces of me. But when I did my 23andMe, it's like I even have like a little West African in me. I'm like, oh boy. And I even have a little Ashkenazi Jewish in me. It's like I love having like all of these drops from around the world in me, because it just means that people have moved around a lot, and I'm a product of all of these people migrating everywhere, and and we're all unique individuals, and this is what it's end up as.
Yeah, so it doesn't really inform your work a lot. It sounds like
Not
it doesn't
really.
inform your work a lot.
I definitely grew up culturally as a white girl, a white girl in
Okay.
Los Angeles, even
Yeah.
though like when I was little, my sister really shamed me for being Mexican because we had different fathers. And so I did have like a lot of cultural shame around about being Mexican when I was a child. But then as I grew up, I like came to embrace that and own it. And that's just, a lot of people are shamed for different parts of themselves. And I really love when a person can transform and take a part of them that they used to be shamed for and embrace it, whether it be, your sexual orientation or, a physical aspect of yourself. The whole self-acceptance journey is one that we all have to take and are working toward.
Yeah, it sounds like that's your focus, no matter what you're working with, is healing shame.
Yeah.
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 Healing shame, and also just getting down to the core of finding out who we are authentically and owning that, because a lot of people, when we're little, we somehow get the idea that who we are authentically isn't enough to be loved and accepted. And so we start creating this idealized version of ourselves and like, oh, if I could just be like this, then I will be loved and accepted. And so this idealized version of ourself actually becomes our false self or our egotistical self. And we're just trying to be something that people will love and accept. And so a lot of my work in my life has been like finding out what this ideal self is and learning how to release that, instead of trying to be this idealized version of myself, like learning how to let that go, coming back to my center and healing that wound in my heart that says my authentic self is not enough to be loved and accepted. And that's, I've been doing a lot of work on that. And that's, why I love doing the work that I do with this sacred sensuality, because a lot of people disown parts of themselves and they don't feel like, their authentic self is enough to be loved and accepted. When somebody comes to me, they are enveloped in a bubble of love and acceptance, and I'm holding space and I'm letting them know, like, yes, your authentic self is enough to be loved and accepted. And let me give you a little glimpse of that, and let me help you get in touch with that and feel some of that energy, so that when you leave here, it may not change your life. You're going to feel just a little bit of transformation, and hopefully you can carry that into your regular life and continue on that path of getting in touch with yourself and accepting yourself.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Okay, well, is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
Let's see.
That's a big question.
um not anything I can think of off the top of my head. It's just been a joy reconnecting with you and
Yeah.
talking with you. And
Yes. Yes. So nice to see you after what, 12 years? Great
yes,
to see you. Yeah.
yes,
And I'm so glad that you're still growing and devoted to this work of this healing work through
yeah.
sexuality. That's really inspiring. So thanks for talking with us. And I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. Let's see.